Welcome back to the African Exodus show. My name is Sister Tierney, here to you with a new video. Before we get started with today's video, some very quick housekeeping for you. If you have a desire to be connected with this channel outside of YouTube, the best way to do that is to join my Telegram channel. The link to that is right in the description. It's a free app to download. And the thing about Telegram is that you'll get notifications anytime that I upload a new video, anytime that a video is live, you'll get notifications directly to your phone. In addition, if you feel led to support this ministry, you can do so a number of ways. One is through Cashapp and also through PayPal. The PayPal link is actually in the description. And also through my Patreon. The Patreon link is also in the end of the description. And there I share any type of presentation materials, the scriptures that I cite, or if it's an article I cite, I will also upload it directly to Patreon so you can do your own research on your own time. So we're going to continue on talking about a very important subject. We were talking again about the law, right? And why there is a lawless deception that many people fall prey to. In fact, Yahushua even warned us that there's going to be many people in the end who will say, I cast out demons in your name. I did miracles. I prophesied in your name. I did all these things that are associated with being a follower of Yahushua, right? But he will say, depart from me. I never knew you, you worker of lawlessness. So right there, that was a warning to us that many people who think that they follow him are going to fall prey to lawlessness of all things. So a lawless religion is not one where Yahushua is actually in the center. A lawless religion is one that's going to be following your own will and your own want. Unfortunately, many people feel completely justified saying things such as, we're not under the law. Now, we covered that one previously, but today we're going to cover another common phrase that you hear inside of Christianity, and that is that we are not under the curse of the law. Something that is often used completely, I would say, not just out of context. Like, unfortunately, again, we have this mindset that what something means to us inside of 2025 must be what it meant to the ancient Hebrews who were living over 2,000 years ago. That wouldn't make sense, though. You would want to know the culture of those people. You want to know the history of those people. What does not being under the curse of the law mean to them? And we did cover some of this when we were talking previously, particularly about not being under the law. But I want to go a little bit further talking about the curse of the law, because the curse of the law is pointing to something so specific and something so particular to a particular people inside of this world, that to brush over it as if it's something that is from our language of our English language and that we can get the understanding there, to brush over it like that is not doing it justice. Instead, you have to understand the curse of the law as something that is literally having been played out over time, over history, and with a particular people who we know as the Hebrew people. So we're going to start off with the scripture so often miscited or misspoken and used in the incorrect context. That is Galatians 3:10 through 14. It says, for all who are of works of the law are under a curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not abide by all the things written in the book of the law to do them. Now, that no one is justified by the law before Elohim is evident, for the righteous one will live by faith. However, the law is not of faith. On the contrary, the person who performs them will live by them. Hamashiach redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree, in order that Hamashiach Yahushua, the blessing of Abraham, would come to the Gentiles, so that we would receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. So we talked about this previously. Anytime that Paul is saying the law as to say that this thing we are not to adhere to or is not pertinent to us in a present tense, he's telling us that the judgment of the law, the judgment being that anyone who breaks the law is guilty and therefore should be sentenced to death. He's telling us that that is not our portion if you are in Yahushua HaMashiach. Now, if you're not in Yahushua HaMashiach, you are bound to that law, or maybe you're bound to other laws inside of the Gentile system. But if you are in him, then the curses that would be associated with and the judgment that would be associated with you are not binding to you. So when Paul says we are not under a curse of the law, for it is written, cursed is everyone who does not abide by all the things written in the book of the law to do them. What he's literally saying is that the Yasharites inside of ancient Yasharel or Israel, they broke the law. Because they broke the law, they have judgment waged against them. They have had judgment. This is a historical fact that we're going to talk about more deeply. Now, because of that, if you want to cling to the law as being your basis for being clean and for being righteous and for being moral, well, that covenant has already been broken. It was broken by ancient Yasharel. We can't unbreak a covenant. You can have a new covenant, and that new covenant is in Yahushua HaMashiach. But as far as you trying to cling to the first covenant, understand that judgment has already been made against that first covenant. The first covenant that Yah made with the children of Yasharel, it ends in death because they did not keep the covenant. They did not follow Yah's law. Therefore, they have judgment against them. So if you read that in this context, now it reads differently when he says that no one is justified by the law before Elohim is evident. Of course, no one is justified by the law because, again, that first covenant is already written as guilty. There's no way that you can be judged as righteous inside of a covenant that was already broken and where you are on the side that is guilty. It says, on the contrary, the person who performs them will live by them. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. As we covered previously, and just definitely go back and check out that teaching that we did on not being under the law. Yahushua HaMashiach, he became a curse in order for us to be redeemed. He is our Passover lamb. We also covered this inside of the Sabbath question, whether or not Yahushua said that we are not to adhere to this Shabbat. Now it says, in order that Yahushua HaMashiach or HaMashiach Yahushua, the blessing of Abraham would come to the Gentiles so that we would receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. So again, because of what was done from Yahushua, not only is Yasharel having the chance to be redeemed, but anyone who's outside of Yasharel has the opportunity to join Yasharel and also similarly be redeemed if they are grafted into the kingdom of Yahuwah. We're not going to talk about that particular thing this day. I think it's going to be something we're going to hit very soon as far as what does it mean to be grafted in. But what we're going to, again, focus on is the curses that are on Yasharel. You might think to yourself, and I've heard this so many times, particularly when you're dealing with people with a carnal mindset, what kind of God would just curse at people? Like, this is just so wrong. Like, what type of God, angry God is this? This is something that the world will rationalize and try to demean Yahuwah for, right? They'll try to say essentially that Yahuwah, to have had a curse on the people, that makes him a God that should not be served. But understand, first and foremost, whatever type of people you are, wherever you come from, all of us are bound to different type of covenants that have been made over time. And so whether you are bound to this covenant, you are bound to other covenants. And if you do not fulfill that covenant, then you yourself will be under a curse. And we don't think like this, but many of us don't understand that things that happen inside of your family history, things that are in your bloodline, some difficulties that keep repeating, things that are reoccurring inside of your family, it really goes down to the fact that people inside of our bloodlines have made covenants with gods, with idols, with things that are spiritual. And because they did not fulfill the covenant, or maybe it was being fulfilled for a while until a certain break inside of the generation. Whenever that happens, unfortunately, there are going to be some ramifications. Now, if you are under Yahushua, so is the case also for you, that through his blood, through his sacrifice, you are not bound to those covenants. But we have to understand, it's not that only Yahuwah is going to curse you for not following through on a covenant. This is something that is a spiritual principle. It's something that is more real. For example, then let's say you broke a law or broke a covenant or broke a contract. You break a contract in the natural, you can possibly try to get your way out of the ramifications of breaking that contract. However, if you break a contract in the spiritual, it's even more real than the type of contracts that we might break inside of our own lives. So if we think about it like this, whenever we read Deuteronomy 30:19-20, it says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have placed before you life and death and the blessing and the curse. So choose life in order that you may live, you and your descendants, by loving Yahuwah your Elohim, by obeying his voice, and by holding close to him. For this is your life in the length of your days, so that you may live in the land which Yahuwah swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. I want you to understand that when Yahuwah put this covenant in place, that they had every opportunity to say, no, we do not want to be bound by this covenant. We do not want to bind our descendants by this covenant. But the people of Yasharel chose to be bound by this covenant. Now you might say, why would they want to be bound by this covenant? Because there were promises. There were good promises that they would be the head and not the tail, that no nation would ever be able to compete with them. There were so many good things that were on the table that the people collectively decided that, yeah, we're going to go for this covenant. Yeah, we're going to go for this. Now, did they think that they were going to instead become a curse? I'm sure not. I'm sure that they thought that there's so many good things that are on the table that, of course, we can get it together. Of course, we can follow this covenant. We can keep this covenant. But they did not. And because they did not, again, they fell out of the grace of Yahuwah. So we have to understand that Yahuwah is an Elohim, a God of order. And he is not going to make himself a liar, meaning when he says that these are the curses and these are the blessings, he's not going to make himself a liar in that if you break that covenant, then you get to have blessings. No, he's going to go follow through because there's an order to things. He is the Elohim of order and he has to keep his own order. And that's why, by the way, everyone, because I have some people who believe in the first covenant as being their covenant. They don't want to join to the second covenant, to the new covenant that was prophesied in Jeremiah, that there would be a new covenant. They think that they can find their redemption by keeping the old covenant and they don't want to associate with anything new. But I want you to understand that if you're clinging to that old covenant, you are clinging to those curses. There's no other way to make a covenant that is broken, unbroken. You would have to have a new covenant. And if you don't have a new covenant, you are left with what is on the table. Yahuwah is not going to undo that old covenant for you, all because maybe you're not like your ancestors and you want to do right under the old covenant and you want to change your ways and you want to follow the old covenant to the T, and you'll get it right this time. Let's say that you do get it right. Let's say that you actually are able to keep the covenant, although it would be very hard for you because there's certain things inside of the old covenant that we just don't have, like the temple and the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood. We don't have that, so we literally can't keep the first covenant the way that it was kept. But let's say that you do everything that you can do inside of your power, that you keep all of the commands that you are able to do. Are you still going to be justified? No, that covenant is already broken. The ship has sailed. Once a covenant is broken and you have judgment in place, after judgment, you can't undo what is already in motion. That is that you have fallen guilty. You have been declared guilty under the covenant that you're seeking to be justified by. So I pray that any of you who don't want to adhere to a new covenant, just pray on that and think about that. If the covenant is already broken and I can't find any type of justification under this covenant, should I be clinging to this? And maybe there's something to this being a new covenant. Like many people have said, maybe I should think about this and go back through the prophecies about the new covenant, about the Messiah, what he would be like, what he would do, how he would be an atonement for the sins of Yasharel. Maybe I should go back through that. So let's go forward. I want to talk, first, I want to hit a few points. Number one, because we're going to go through the curses inside of Deuteronomy 28, and we're going to go through them slowly. I've spoken about the curses of Deuteronomy 28. Many people have spoken about the curses of Deuteronomy 28 and gone through them slowly and methodically. But I want to just spend some time doing this because I want to hit this point that many of us have thought that we're not under a curse. We thought that we're free. We thought that we have free agency, that we could do what we want. And we don't understand that, again, if you are not inside of Yahushua HaMashiach, you are still under that first covenant curses. You don't even have to know who Yahuwah is. You don't have to have ever read the Bible, right? But you're under that curse because this curse would extend not just to the people who made it, but to their descendants forever. So a few points. I want you to understand that these curses that we're going to go through, they are numerous, and it might seem like impractical. Like, oh, how could this curse be on me and this curse? I want you to understand that the curses, as they are spoken, would not necessarily apply to every single person the same, or every single people the same, like every single modern day people the same. You might see some of them in this way and some of them in another way. So, for example, you might see them manifest inside of Africa differently, that you might see them manifest inside of the diaspora, because Africa is a different context. Inside of the diaspora, you will see the people who are the Hebrews dealing with the curses in a different way. And by the way, if you are one of those people who have pushed back on the idea that in Africa and the diaspora, that these are the true Hebrews, I will put a link to a video right here. Definitely go through that before you argue that point, because to me, if you believe in the scriptures in the Bible, there's no way that you can argue that those people who are calling themselves Jewish, those people over inside of the Palestinian land, inside of Israel, there's no way that you can say, I believe in the Bible, but argue that these people are actually the fulfillment of the Bible. If you believe the Bible, I mean, there's a lot of people who I'm realizing don't believe it, even though they think they believe it. They'll take parts out in order to make their understanding correct. But your understanding of who the true Hebrews are is just not correct. And so you have to decide, who are you with? Who are you standing for? Are you standing for this people who are representing themselves a certain way? Or do you stand with the God, the Elohim of the Bible? If you stand with the Elohim of the Bible, again, just let the text speak for itself. You don't need a person, a scholar, to come and interpret it for you and put it inside of a different worldview and have you understand it differently. No, you should be able to read the text clearly as for what it says and make a decision on who is the fulfillment of these scriptures. So again, I cover that inside of the video. Who are the real Hebrew? Let me see, what's the title? The Real Hebrews According to the Bible. I cover that inside of that video. So definitely watch that video and see if you agree. Now, another thing to understand. So one, again, as I said, the curses, they're different for different people. You're going to see it manifest differently for people inside of colonialism than you would for people who are part of the transatlantic slave trade or the East African slave trade. It manifests differently. In addition, understand that there are exceptions in certain contexts. Now, what do I mean by that? So one thing that you will see is that although people of the African diaspora, wherever they are, some people will be doing well inside of a system. So you will see some people, some African Americans, for example, I'll use that because that's my title, African American, right? You will see some who are flourishing inside of America, never as well as, their oppressors, but they're flourishing, right? They have mansions, they have planes, they have prestige, a name inside of that country. And it might make you think, well, if that's the case, if these curses apply to you people, then there should never be a such thing as Oprah Winfrey, right? But one thing that you have to understand about those exceptions is that they all only are able to function inside of this way because of their closeness to power. Meaning, if they had no closeness to the same oppressive system, if they had no affiliations with the system, if they acted against the system, i.e. Kanye West, even though I think he's a distraction, but if you look at him as an example of what happens whenever those people who are given wealth and given a name and given prestige, if they say something that the system will not allow, then you get to see, no, actually, they were not an exception. Their ability to function inside of this world was determinant of them continuing on with the agenda of the Babylonian system. So had those people acted against the system, they would become a pariah. So no person like Oprah, no person, Kanye, whoever you want to use, who's the black, I think, billionaire, Bill Johnson or something like that. You could say it in the chat if you know. But these people are only able to be success stories because of their closeness to power, or else they would be done away with. So a good example of this is like whenever you start learning about people who wanted to be independent minded, whether it was like the Black Wall Street. And I've heard, by the way, the Black Wall Street and the Black Wall Streets that would pop up, they had closeness to power. That's why they were allowed to function for a little while, but even this a certain amount of independence, they were not able to exercise it to the fullest extent, because the second that they became a threat to the white power structure who did away with them, the same white power structure. So I say that to say that when you read the curses of Deuteronomy 28, it does not mean that there will not be success stories, that there will not be people who look like they are not under the curses. Those people are still under the curses. They can only function inside of this way because of their closeness to their oppressors. And if they ever step out of line, you will be reminded that, yes, you are still under these curses. And the last point that I want to, again, emphasize as we go through Deuteronomy 28 is that you have to remember that the people who have been told and sold to you as being the fulfillment of this prophecy, who we know of as Jewish people, you have to ask yourself honestly, does this apply to them? Look at the history as they tell it. And I obviously disagree with much of what they say about the history, but they say that they are the true people, the true Hebrew people. They say that they went through the Assyrian captivity and the Babylonian captivity. And after that, they would go through different countries inside of Europe and whatnot, and they would be pushed out. And I'm not combating that, like they would be pushed out of these countries. But does that actually fulfill what we're actually going to go through? Does this fulfill the prophecy that these people would literally be impoverished, that they would be dealing with diseases and plights? Does this fulfill the prophecies against Yasharel? Okay, remember as we go through this that Yasharel did not keep the covenant. What happens when you don't keep a covenant? You become a covenant breaker. And when you become a covenant breaker, all of the judgment and the curses that are written out are now falling on you. Can you honestly be real and say that these people are fulfillment of this covenant that we're about to go through? Now, before we go through Deuteronomy 28, actually, I do want to just read from this article, because I don't want to assume that everyone watching this is understanding the plight of the African diaspora, Africa's children. And to be clear, is every single person who comes from Africa a Hebrew? No, not every single person who comes from Africa is a child of Yasharel as far as the bloodline. But when I tell you that the people have been so dispersed throughout Africa that it would be very difficult to make an argument that there is not a sizable amount of people throughout Africa who do count as being one of the children of Yasharel, who are actually descended from the children of Yasharel, it's just very difficult to make that argument. Literally, they went all over the entire continent of Africa. If you want some proof of that, you can definitely go to the playlist on this channel, Conspiracy to Erase a Nation. That is a book that I wrote on this subject, and I also wrote it on where the actual people of Yasharel originated from. They didn't originate from Palestine. And if you actually read the scriptures, they originated from a part of East Africa. So I'm going to just go through this because I want you to understand, in case you're not aware, Africa is unable to loosen itself from the chains, from the bondage that it has been under. And while not every single person who is African is necessarily a descendant of Yasharel, you should at the same time understand that Lucifer knows what the true children of Yasharel look like, where they're from. And because of that, he has waged an all-out war on this entire continent and people who come from this continent, and it's very easy to see. So let's read this article. It says, Africa is not poor, we are stealing its wealth. Africa is poor, but we can try to help its people. It's a simple statement repeated through 1,000 images, newspaper stories, and charity appeals each year, so that it takes on the weight of truth. When we read it, we reinforce assumptions and stories about Africa that we've heard throughout our lives. We reconfirm our image of Africa. Try something different. Africa is rich, but we steal its wealth. That's the essence of a report from several campaign groups released today. Based on a set of new figures, it finds that sub-Saharan Africa is a net creditor to the rest of the world to the tune of more than $41 billion. Sure, there's money going in, around $161 billion a year, in the form of loans, remittances, those working outside Africa and sending money back home, and aid. But there's also 203 billion leaving the continent. Some of this is direct, such as $68 billion in mainly dodged taxes. Essentially, multinational corporations steal much of this legally by pretending they are really generating their wealth in tax havens. These so-called illicit financial flows amount to around 6.1% of the continent's entire gross domestic product, or 3 times what Africa receives in aid. So let's just listen to what we just said. So it said that about 3 times more than what Africa gets in aid is actually leaving the continent of Africa. What people would allow this? Let's think about this. What sovereign people would allow this? What people who are not under bondage would allow themselves to be taken advantage of? So to the point where you are literally the poorest of the poor, you're the bottom of the bottom, you are the people who are the most disadvantaged throughout the world. Then it says, then there's 30 billion that these corporations repatriate profits they make in Africa, but send back to their home country or elsewhere to enjoy their wealth. There are also more indirect means by which we pull wealth out of Africa. Today's report estimates that 29 billion a year is being stolen from Africa in illegal logging, fishing, and think about fishing because many people are starving inside of the African continent, and trade in wildlife. 36 billion is owed to Africa as a result of the damage that climate change will cause to their societies and their economies, or I'll put a asterisk in there and say weather modification. And they're unable to use fossil fuels to develop in the way that Europe did. A climate crisis was not caused by Africa, but Africans will feel the effect more than others. Needless to say, the funds are not currently forthcoming. In fact, even this assessment is enormously generous because it assumes that all of the wealth flowing into Africa is benefiting the people of that continent. But loans to governments and private sector can turn into unpayable, odious debt. Ghana, the country where I happen to live, is losing 30% of its government revenue to debt repayments, paying loans which were often made speculatively based on high commodity prices and carrying whooping rates of interest. One particularly odious aluminum smelter in Mozambique, built with loans and aid money, is costing the country 21 euros for every 1 euro that the Mozambique government receives. So, the article goes on. I'll stop there because I want to just hammer this point that we have to see what's happening inside of a present tense, because obviously we could talk about the past. We could talk about colonialism. We could talk about the different slave trades that occurred throughout Africa. But when you understand that what happens after colonialism, neocolonialism, was far worse than colonialism, because while in colonialism you have a European power who is outwardly exerting power over your country. They are actively saying that we own this country of Ghana. We own this country of Jamaica. They're making those claims. In neocolonialism, they're saying, no, you're free. You're free to do as you wish. You're free to do as you please. All the while, they are making deals with your governments, with the corporations inside of your countries in order to continue to pillage your country, to pillage your economies. So literally, you're not even able to say where the oppressor is. That's what Kwame Nkrumah said. He said that neocolonialism is far worse than colonialism because we don't have an identifiable oppressor. It's very similar to what we deal with in the African diaspora. When you think about the many brothers and sisters who are in the prison system, technically they can make an argument they put themselves there. Yet who put them in a neighborhood without any financial revenue? Who put them in a neighborhood that was redlined, a neighborhood where there's no investment for the people who are coming out? Who put them inside of an education system that is completely depleted of resources, that's not even teaching? Who put them inside of that circumstance and then told them, go out in the world and be a success? Were they a success? No. Many of them fall into crime, and crime then gets to be just to make that person subject to the prison industrial complex. And so we have slavery, even though technically not slavery, the person falls into it just as easily because they don't even know that they are literally in a system meant to enslave them. So think about these things as we go through these curses. No, we are not in a present tense dealing with colonialism on a mass scale, formal colonialism. We're dealing with neo-colonialism. We're dealing with debt that is waged on all over the African continent. We're dealing with corporations that are coming in and making deals with our governments without us knowing what the deals were. No, we are not dealing with formal slavery inside of the diaspora for the most part, although let me be clear, there's some formal slavery still happening with the children of Yasharel, particularly when you look inside of countries like Libya and in the Middle East. There is now there's now a Middle East African slave trade that's happening through many of those Arab countries. But in the West, we don't have formal slavery, but don't get it twisted because we're still inside of a system that exploits us and hides its hand. That's the worst thing. Makes us think that we're free even when we're not free. With that being said, let's go through Deuteronomy 28 and let's take our time. So we're starting with chapter 15. By all means, by the way, start with Deuteronomy 28:1 because you have to understand the curses, but you also have to understand the blessings that were promised to Yasharel. So I encourage you, go through the whole chapter of Deuteronomy 28 on your own time. But we're going to start with verse 15. But it shall come about, if you do not obey Yahuwah your Elohim, to be careful to follow all his commandments and his statutes which I am commanding you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Cursed will you be in the city, and cursed will you be in the country. Cursed will be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed will be the children of your womb, the produce of your ground, the newborn of your herd, and the offspring of your flock. Cursed will you be when you come in, and cursed will you be when you go out. Now, the thing I want you to recognize about this, cursed will you be when you go in and when you come out. What this scripture is telling us is that if you do not keep the law of Yahuwah and follow the law, that there will be no out. There will be no solution. Think about wherever you are, if you're in part of the African diaspora, you, I'm sure, have witnessed this, that we have these leaders, right, that come out. Many of them are attached to the power of the oppressor, right? Many of them are coming through NGOs and nonprofits that are well-funded, but they get to be our leaders, and they present us with solutions, and these solutions are always kind of repackaged, something that someone probably said 50 years ago, but they're trying to make it modern, right? But these solutions that they offer, they never can get us out of our circumstance. And then you realize there is no solution. There's nothing that can happen. So when people say, oh, we just need to keep fathers in the home, or hey, we just need to fix the education system, we need to have after school programs. Some will say, oh, we need to have intervention with the gangs. We need to do this and that. So many type of solutions. What it says, cursed will you be when you come in, and cursed will you be when you go out. This means there is no solution. So, verse 20, Yahuwah will send against you curses, panic, and rebuke in everything you undertake to do until you are destroyed and until you perish quickly on account of the evil of your deeds, because you have abandoned me. Yahuwah will make the plague cling to you until he has eliminated you from the land where you are entering to take possession of it. Yahuwah will strike you with consumption, inflammation, fever, feverish heat, and with a sword, with blight, and with mildew, and they will pursue you until you perish. The heaven which is over your head shall be bronze, and the earth which is under you iron. Yahuwah will make the rain of your land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down on you until you are destroyed. Now, what does this point to? The many images that all of us should be associated with of Africa. Now, I'm not saying all Africa looks one way. Every single country inside of Africa is different. However, you see commonality, particularly with the parts of Africa that are with people who are dark-skinned, black-skinned, the parts of Africa that are called sub-Saharan Africa. What do you see commonly inside of these countries? You see poverty, you see disease, you see famines, literally where it says that your land powder and dust. That is a real reality where you have land that cannot bear fruit for the children of Africa, despite the fact that this is the land that should be able to bear the most fruit. How many times do you have people from outside come to the same land and they're able to make it fruitful? What is it about these people? Nothing. They don't even know the ancient techniques. So how are they able to make something fruitful that is not fruitful for many Africans? Now let's go to verse 25. Yahuwah will cause you to be defeated by your enemies. You will go out one way against them, but you will flee 7 ways from their presence, and you will be an example of terror to all the kingdoms of the earth. Your dead bodies will serve as food for all birds of the sky and for the animals of the earth, and there will be no one to frighten them away. So these are examples of something that I think is real. That is that whenever we have enemies, we can never ultimately shake them off. Let me give you a really good real life example of this, because we have to be careful whenever we celebrate things inside of our history. Many of you are aware that the Haitian Revolution was a revolution that was very important inside of history. The Haitian Revolution literally was the only successful slave revolt inside of the Americas. Now, despite it being the only slave revolt that was successful in the Americas, it also caused a lot of retribution to be waged against African people. Not even just in Haiti, by the way, but also inside of the Americas after the Haitian Revolution, because the oppressor was so afraid of what could happen whenever you have these Africans come together and completely do away with the chains and completely go after them. They were so afraid that literally after this happened, many people began just doing different things in order to frighten the people who they were enslaving, such as, lynchings would be more prominent after these slave revolts. A lot of times they would just increase their security, but basically become more brutal in order to make sure that they were keeping the people that they enslaved subservient. Now, in the Haitian Revolution, something that's very interesting, first of all, is that a lot of people celebrate it because they were able to be successful initially in ridding themselves of the colonizer, which was France. But they did not really rid themselves of the colonizer. That's the thing that we have to understand. Even though they were able to get rid of the white presence that was on the island at that time, guess what happens after? A guy named Napoleon, who is the emperor of France, he says, okay, you guys want to be free? Well, you owe us. You owe us for the infrastructure that we built in your country. You owe us because we were getting money from this particular colony. So you're going to have this crazy debt, and I don't remember the exact amount. Look it up on Google, but this crazy debt that you can never repay, and you're going to repay us. And if you don't want to repay us, we're going to create a blockade around your island so that nothing can enter. That is what happens. And essentially, this revolution ends up being what Haiti is today. Now, obviously, a lot of things have happened afterwards. The United States, another oppressor, comes after it. But these are all enemies of the Haitian people. And the Haitian people, by the way, are Hebrews, if you know the history. Not see my book, Conspiracy to Erase a Nation. Now, these are the enemies of the Haitian people. They were able to fight them off for a time, but were they able to prevail? No. Why? Because these curses are present. These curses are operating on the people even when they're able to prevail or able to succeed in some ways. Ultimately, the enemy has other operatives who can go in and completely derail what you thought you were achieving. So let's go forward. We're starting with verse 27. Yahuwah will strike you with the boils of Egypt, with tumors, the festering rash, and the scabies from which you cannot be healed. Yahuwah will strike you with insanity, blindness, and with the confusion of the mind. You'll be groping around at noon, just as a person who is blind gropes in the darkness. And you will not be successful in your ways, but you will only be oppressed and robbed all the time with no one to save you. Now, this is so powerful because I just feel like this is literally the experience of obviously so many, but this is the African American experience, right? Where it says that you will not be successful in your ways, but you will only be oppressed and robbed all the time. That's not just the African American experience. This is the African experience all over the world. So what we have to understand is that there's again a operative curse on us. And anytime that we think that we're able to free ourselves, able to be a success, able to be the head and not the tail, these curses are operating on us. And so we can't be silly enough to think that we ourselves can rid ourselves of this condition. He goes on to say, you will betroth a woman, but another man will violate her. You will build a house, but you will not live in it. You'll plant a vineyard, but you will not make use of its fruit. Your ox will be slaughtered before your eyes, but you will not eat of it. Your donkey will be snatched away from you and will not be restored to you. Your sheep will be given to your enemies, and you will have no one to save you. This, to me, reminds me of the destruction of the Black family inside of America and the family, again, of many people inside of the African diaspora. We see over and over again on repeat houses that are completely just in shambles, to where either the father's removed from the house, the mother's removed from the house, or the grandparents are having to step in, but even them, they're not able to parent them the way that they really should. We see the destruction of families all throughout America, where it's very evident that there's something that's just happening that we can't put our finger on. And it's not going to be an easy solution. Some people say just give them jobs, or just give them this, give them that, give them assistance. No, there's no solution that works. Notice that welfare has the opposite effect on our families. It does not help us stay together. Instead, many times it becomes a reason for us to break apart. So going forward, your sons and your daughters will be given to another people while your eyes look on and long for them constantly, but there will be nothing you can do. People whom you do not know will eat the produce of your ground and every product of your labor, and you will never be anything but oppressed and mistreated continually. You will also be driven insane by the sight of what you see. Yahuwah will strike you on the knees and thighs and with severe boils from which you cannot be healed, and strike you from the sole of your foot to the top of your head. Yahuwah will bring you and your king, whom you appoint over you, to a nation that neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you shall serve other gods made of wood and stone, and you will become an object of horror, a song of mockery, and an object of taunting among all peoples where Yahuwah drives you. This scripture particularly, I think, reminds me of the continent of Africa, because this is literally what happened to the continent. Whenever its children, the people's children, particularly in the West and the East, were ripped from them, where it says they'll be given to another people, your sons and your daughters. I mean, I'm not saying this is the best depiction, but watch the documentary Roots and think about it. When Kuta Kinte was ripped away from his mother and father, right? And they could do nothing about it. Think about what it says when it says that you will be driven insane. And also where it also says a people whom you do not know will eat the produce of your ground, and the ground and the product of your labor. This is what happened in colonialism. Literally, you had people who were from outside who were controlling people inside the continent of Africa, or inside of the islands of the Caribbean, or inside of the Latin American countries. They're controlling them from the outside, and the people are laboring and they're working, and yet they're not even able to eat the produce of their labor. How much of a curse is that? But then this is the important thing you have to see. An object of horror, a song of mockery, an object of taunting among all peoples where Yahuwah drives you. Let me say this. I remember being a kid and being horrified by the African continent. I remember seeing the movie, I don't know if any of you remember this movie, called The Congo, and I was horrified by this place. I thought this place was the worst place to ever be or go. I remember being horrified by the idea of being of African descent. I remember the phrase African booty scratcher. I remember all of these images inside of my head, And one of the worst things that you could ever be growing up was an African. I remember that. Many of you remember that. You remember what it was like when you would see Africans depicted as savages, and it was cemented in your brain. Listen to this when it says it. You'll become an object of horror. It is a fulfillment, a song of mockery. It literally is a mockery, particularly when you look at, like, just watch the BET Awards one day. You'll just see the most coonish mockery being displayed for all the world to see. We're being put on stages by people who own the music industry, and we know what people own the music industry. I'm not going to say it as, what people own the industry. And they put us out there to be mockeries to ourselves, to the world. They put out the most depraved minds out there. They put out the most simpletons. They put out the worst of the worst of us on a stage for us to be a mockery to the world. They put out the sexy reds to be mockeries to the world. They put out the Flavor Flavs. They put out these mockeries of who we are. That's literally our reality. So let's go forward. It says, you will bring out a great amount of seed to the field, but you will gather in little because the locusts will devour it. You will plant and cultivate vineyards, but you will neither drink of the wine nor bring in the harvest because the worm will eat it. You will have olive trees throughout your territory, but you will not anoint yourself with oil because your olives will drop off prematurely. You will father sons and daughters, but they will not remain yours because they will go into captivity. The cricket will take possession of all your trees and the produce of your ground. The stranger who is among you will rise above you higher and higher, and you will go down lower and lower. And he will lend to you, but you will not lend to him. He will be the head and you will be the tail. So this is just a reminder. Like I said, the land does not work for us the same like it does for them. That's what we have to understand. When you are under these curses, it's not that Africa is not the richest continent in the world, which it is. If you think about the mineral wealth, you think about the land, the arable land, it's the richest continent in the world. But when you're under those curses, this land that is rich and fruitful, as it says in the scripture, it will not bring forth fruit for you. And when it says the stranger who was among you will rise above you higher and higher, again, when you think about what happened, let's say, for example, inside of apartheid South Africa, right? Or inside of Zimbabwe, or inside of Congo. And if you know the histories of those countries, as well as, many countries in Africa, South Africa is more pronounced, but they would have white majorities, or minorities rather. They would have white minority people who would start communities, and they would eat off the land, and they're still present inside of these countries. So you have these white minorities who rise higher and higher, who are able to farm, who are able to have so much produce, yet the people from these places lower and lower. Now let's go forward. It says, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you would not obey Yahuwah your Elohim by keeping his commandments and his statutes which he commanded you. And they will become, this is an important part, a sign and a wonder against you and your descendants forever. So let's just think about this, and I'm going to just mention this again. A sign and a wonder on you and your descendants forever. When you think about a people who cannot produce on their land, a people who are never on top, a people who are always on the bottom. Now, if you think that this is the people who are known as the Jewish people, let's be honest. Has there ever been a day where they are under this amount of despair? Let's be honest about who controls the financial system, who controls the banking system. Let's be honest. What country is there right now that is the only country of any country, whether they're African country or Latin American country or whether they're European country? What country is able to wage a genocide in front of the whole world? The United Nations tells them to stop. The ICC tells them to stop. Every single human rights organization tells them to stop. Major countries are telling them to stop. And guess what they can do? They could give every single one of those institutions or countries a middle finger and continue and still be supported by the most powerful country in the world. What one country would be able to do that? We know what's happening right now over in Israel. So are you to believe that these people who are able to exercise a genocide and do so with impunity are the fulfillment of these prophecies? Are you to really believe that, the people who are on top? Because you can only do that if you're on top. You can only do that if you control. We know that the Israel lobby in the U.S., literally, they're controlling the politics of the United States. You can only do that from a position of control. So when you read about this, these will be a sign and a wonder against the descendants forever who are under this covenant. This cannot be those people. This has to be a people who are presently under these curses. Let's go forward. Since you did not serve Yahuwah your Elohim with joy and a cheerful heart, in gratitude for the abundance of all things, you will serve your enemies, whom Yahuwah will send against you in hunger, thirst, nakedness, and devoid of all things, and he will put an iron yoke on your neck until he destroys you. Yahuwah will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, as the eagle swoops down, a nation whose language you will not understand, a nation with a defiant attitude, who will have no respect for the old, nor show favor to the young. Furthermore, it will eat the offspring of your herd and the produce of your ground until you are destroyed, a nation that will leave you no grain, new wine, or oil, nor the newborn of your cattle, or the young of your flock, until they have eliminated you. They will besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down through your land. They will besiege you in all your towns throughout your land, which Yahuwah your Elohim has given you. So this scripture is so important because obviously it is a fulfillment of many things that happened to Yasharel, but it's also a fulfillment of something very specific. So obviously many nations come and enslave Yasharel. For going from the biblical timeline, you have Babylon and Assyria, 2 captivities right there. You also have the Persians. You have different kingdoms that basically come over and rule over them. But the initial carrying away and enslavement, that was Babylon and Assyria, right? You also have the Arabs and the Berbers. And if you don't know about that, you should read my book, Conspiracy to Erase a Nation, who come in during the East African slave trade first. And I want to emphasize that. First is the East African slave trade. Then there's the Trans-Sahara slave trade that was really ruled by the Berbers. Then you have the transatlantic slave trade. And also, obviously, you have these European slavers and colonists who come and do this same thing. But what it specifically says in the scripture, that a nation from far away from the end of the earth as the eagle swoops down, that is particularly looking or pointing to the United States. And we can know that because if you just look at a map of the world, as even though it's distorted, but if you look at a map and look at where Yasharel was, look in East Africa, and even look in Palestine if you don't want to believe that, and look at where all the other countries of the world are. You have Europe; it's still in the same vicinity. Middle East is obviously very close. Obviously Africa's close. Even the East is close, right? The Asian countries. But there's a country that's like in a whole nother place, a whole nother hemisphere, as they call it. That's from the end of the earth. And as it says, it will swoop down as the eagle swoops down. Is it a coincidence that the national bird or animal or symbol of the United States is an eagle? So an eagle will swoop down from the end of the earth. That is literally pointing to not just the other people who come and enslave and oppress, but the United States, who was not the largest, inside of the transatlantic slave trade. But it did something very specific. It came, first of all, towards the end of the slave trade. It wasn't one of the first ones. Portugal was actually the first country to go in and enslave the Hebrew descendants and other Africans who were also included inside of that slave trade. So you first had Portugal, but then you also have a number of other countries, and then later on you have the United States. Well, the United States says it actually keeps the slave trade open longer. And not just that, it has a later effect where it comes back as the world power. And when it comes back as the world power, it institutes a system that is going to continually deprive all of the people of Yasharel. And that is known as the Bretton Woods system. That is why the United States was one of the ones who was the key architect of this system. So when you talk about neocolonialism, this is the creation of the United States. The idea that we would never be able to free ourselves because literally we have a whole economic system that's created to ensure that we're subservient. Research the Bretton Woods system, research what happened, research the US dollar when it became the world reserve currency. So this nation from the end of the earth ensures that we have no control over our grain, our new wine, our oil, our newborn, or of our cattle, our flock, until we are eliminated. That is a fulfillment of that prophecy. To go forward, verse 53, you will eat the offspring of your own body, the flesh of your sons and of your daughters, whom Yahuwah your Elohim has given you, into the siege and the hardship by which your enemy will oppress you. The man who is refined and very delicate among you will be hostile towards his brother, towards the wife he cherishes, and toward the rest of his children who are left, so that he will not give even one of them any of the flesh of his children which he will eat, since he has nothing else lacked during the siege and the hardship by which your enemy will oppress you in all your towns. The refined and delicate woman among you, who would not venture to set the sole of her foot on the ground because of the delicateness and tenderness, will be hostile towards the husband she cherishes, and towards her son, and towards her afterbirth that comes from between her legs, and towards her children whom she gives birth, because she will eat them secretly for lack of anything else during the siege and the hardship with which your enemy will oppress you in your towns. And this is figuratively and this is literally. We should understand the way that the system creates a disgruntled union between men and women, to where instead of building each other up, you will see attacking, and you will see not just attacking of the man, but you will see attacking in some instances of the child. This is literally and figuratively. When it says she will eat the offspring of her womb, how many of us have seen this, where you see a woman who will literally attack the offspring of her womb in order to rob them of their soul, rob them of their sense of being? Now, it's not something that is, all of the African diaspora, but we see these examples. I'll say particularly you'll see these examples in places where you have poverty, where you see these examples in places where you have a lot of the welfare system intact. You will see this model of attack that is being reared against our children, because the children are literally the goal to destroy the seed. That's why you have so many abortion clinics, for example. And you could say that also, the abortion clinics, is a fulfillment of this. The woman literally killing the offspring of her womb in order to survive. Now I want to go forward. It says, if you are not careful to follow all of the words of this law that are written in this book, to fear this honored and awesome name, Yahuwah your Elohim, then Yahuwah will bring extraordinary plagues on you and your descendants, severe and lasting plagues and miserable and chronic sicknesses. And he will bring back on you every disease of Egypt of which you were afraid, and they will cling to you. Also, every sickness and every plague which are not written in the book of this law, Yahuwah will bring on you until you are destroyed. Then you will be left few in number, whereas you are numerous as the stars of heaven, because you did not obey Yahuwah your Elohim. And it will come about that just as Yahuwah rejoiced over you to be good to you and make you numerous, so will Yahuwah rejoice over you to wipe you out and destroy you, and you will be torn away from the land which you are entering to possess. Furthermore, Yahuwah will scatter you among all the peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and there you will serve other gods made of wood and stone, which you and your fathers have not known. And just to emphasize this again, you will not see this story inside of the Jewish diaspora. They might call it a forced migration or expulsion from different countries, but that's not what it says. It says you will be literally spread, it says, from one end of the earth to the other. And so if you think about the transatlantic slave trade. You think about the East African slave trade and the trans-Saharan slave trade. This goes beyond forced migration and expulsion, which we've also experienced as the African diaspora. But this is literally a scattering. Like, this is not something that's being done on your own volition. This is something that's being done against your will. This only is fulfilled by the people who come from the African continent. Going forward, among those nations you will find no peace, and there will be no resting place for the sole of your feet. But there Yahuwah will give you a trembling heart, failing eyes, and despair of the soul. So your lives will be hanging in doubt before you, and you will be terrified night and day and have no assurance of your life. And I want to emphasize this point right here. You'll find no peace, because you will see some of our people go to the West, go to Europe, go to America and whatnot, but they truly don't have peace. They know that at the end of the day, they are disposable and their lives are always under a occupying presence. They know that they have no true security because ultimately they're connected to power many times, or they might just be being surveilled by the oppressor. And so I'll give you an example of this. You might see some Africans, African Americans, whatnot. You might see them go to a European country or to America, and they get to be prominent inside of these organizations. And it looks like that they have rest, right? It looks like that they have rest for their souls. But if you think about it, those people oftentimes, they're only allowed to have that prominence so long as they're pushing a certain agenda. And one place I've seen this, for example, is where you have Africans come from an African continent, they're of the diaspora, and they start preaching, for example, LGBT pride, and they start lecturing Africans that, hey, you should have more LGBT pride. They start going back to Africa. They'll go back to Ghana. They'll go back to Uganda and chastise them for not having promoted LGBT lifestyle inside of their countries. A lot of times it's Africans. And I remember particularly Ghana, there was a letter that was sent to the Ghanaian government because the government passed a law. And I'm not saying, whether or not the law is right or wrong. I mean, to me personally, I think these are issues of morality that Yahuwah will judge. But they decided to pass a law, as every country has its right. And it was an anti-LGBT law. That's how it was being labeled. And I remember you had so many Africans inside of the diaspora. I remember people like Idris Elba, for example, who signed on to this letter to chastise the Ghanaian government. So think about that. You might go to these countries. You might go to Europe like Idris Elba's parents did. Then you get to be a famous actor and whatnot. But you're only allowed to have this false sense of peace and security so long as you are with that agenda. And you're literally pushing and promoting things that go against Yahuwah's law. Think about that. If you're an asset to the system, if you're an asset to the government, you are collaborating to push sinfulness, to push lawlessness amongst the people. Going on, it says, in the morning you will say, if only it were evening. And at evening you will say, if only it were morning, because of the terror of your heart, which you fear, and the sight of your eyes, which you see. And Yahuwah will bring you back to Egypt. So this is an important part, obviously. He'll bring you back to Egypt in ships, by the way, about which I said to you, you will never see it again. And there you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, and there will be no buyer. So I said this is an important part. First of all, this particular part of the scripture is one that woke many people up to the fact that they were of Yasharel, because if you don't know, there's no history of the Jewish people being sold back to Egypt in ships. And by the way, Egypt, the literal word is Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means the house of bondage. So there's no history of that, even in their own history, right? But I want you to know that there's been a lot of work to change the meaning, to hide this fact. And there's so many things that are being done to hide this reality. It's too late. Frankly, time's up for keeping this concealed, but a lot has been done to hide this reality. And one thing that's been done is the translations have tweaked the words. So I'm going to read from the KJV, and then I'm going to read from the one that you all know, I tell you all, definitely read the Septuagint, because that is the translation that is not manipulated from the Synagogue of Satan or the Masoretic text, if you know what I'm saying. And I have a whole video on the Masoretic text, by the way. I can link that right here for you all. so that you can understand that there's different translations, and one translation that is the most diabolical is the one that most of us have inside of our bookcase. That's the Masoretic text, because it literally removes things that are pertinent to Yasharel, including things about the Messiah. But so the KJV, it says, and Yahweh or Yahuwah will bring thee unto Egypt again with ships by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Now let's pay attention here. Right now it's saying that you shall be sold. What did the other version? This is the NASB, which is usually particular to the text, but it says that you will offer yourselves. So they tried to hide it and make it seem like that this particular scripture is about people offering themselves to slavery and not being sold forcibly. Listen to the Septuagint version. Yahuwah shall bring thee back to Mitzrayim, house of bondage, and ships. And by the way of which I said, thou shalt not see it again. And ye shall be sold to your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and none shall buy you. Now, this is important because this is telling us specifically where it says none shall buy you. Some people try to change the meaning to mean like you won't be sold. But if it literally says, again, in the KJV inside of the Septuagint, that you will be sold to your enemies. So we know that someone bought you, right? If you're sold to your enemies, someone bought you. And when it says no one shall buy you, well, if it's saying that you will be sold, someone did buy you. But when it says no one shall buy you, this is mean redeem you. No one shall redeem you. For example, inside of the American slavery is very common. You will see once someone buys their own freedom, right? You might see an enslaved African, a slave person buy their own freedom. Once they're out of slavery, they can go back and buy their family out of it, right? So where it says no one shall redeem you, meaning there's not going to be someone who's going to come and buy you from this captivity. This captivity will be ongoing, whether it's inside of literal chains or whether it's inside of a system where you are held captive ongoing. So this is very important for you to understand that they are literally trying to change this and hide it. But it's very clear that no one shall buy you, and also that you will be sold. This is talking about people who were sold into the house of Mitzrayim, the house of bondage. Now, back to the purpose why we did this video. I said this is about the curses of the law. How do we get these curses lifted? Because if you are someone who is of the African diaspora, you know that you've seen these curses. You've experienced these curses. You felt there being a ceiling over your head. You felt there being a something on your back, something that is following you, something that is keeping you from being successful, something that is killing your fruitfulness, killing your ability to produce. So when you're under that type of oppression, spiritual oppression, can you be freed from it? Go back to Galatians 3:10-14. It says that Yahushua HaMashiach, actually going down to verse 13, redeemed us from the curse of the law, meaning there is salvation for you if you are born again into Yahushua HaMashiach, meaning if you believe that Yahushua HaMashiach is the Redeemer. And not just believe, you have to die to yourself, the same that he died. And you will be resurrected. You will be given his spirit. And that enters you into the new covenant. And in this new covenant, you are not under a curse, but you are under life. That is the only way to be free from the curses. Deuteronomy 21, it says, verse 22, if a person has committed a sin carrying a sentence of death, and he's put to death, you can hang him on a tree. You hang him on a tree. His body is not to be left overnight on the tree, but you shall certainly bury him on the same day, for he who is hanged is cursed of Elohim, so that you do not defile your land, which Yahuwah your Elohim has given you as an inheritance, meaning Yahushua HaMashiach, who you've been told is called Jesus Christ, but his true name, Yahushua HaMashiach. He became a curse, literally, for you. He was hung on a tree. They say a cross, but really he was hung on a stake or a pole. He was hung on a tree. And because he was hung on there, he became a curse. And because he became a curse, he was a sacrifice for the sins of Yasharel, where they came and disobeyed Yah. Now you were given the ability, because of a new spirit that will live in you, to actually obey Yah. And one more thing I want to emphasize about freeing yourself from these curses is that you do have to leave the spiritual bondage that is associated with this oppressive system known as Babylon or Egypt, Mitzrayim, whatever you want to call it, this house of bondage. You do have to leave it. As Revelations 18:4 says, I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive any of her plagues. Now, I've heard a lot of people ask the question, when Yahuwah is saying, come out of her, my people, is this literal? Meaning, like, are we being told to physically leave Babylon, or are we being told to spiritually leave Babylon? And depending on who you are and your circumstances, it can be both, or it can be one. One is that, number one, if you are inside of a place that has you participating in the sins of the place where you are in, so let me give you an example. If you're working for an LGBT organization, which I once did, for example, whenever I was an attorney, I was working for an organization that pushed that agenda very hard, or even before I was working for that organization, when I was working as a public defender. And many times I was working as a public defender where I would defend children who were in the foster care system. And one thing I realized is that things were changing very quickly, and it very could be the case that I would be advocating for a child who identified themselves as being trans to be given that right, despite their parents saying, this is not something that's right. We don't agree with this, or we don't want you to have a medical procedure. I could have been put in that position. When I seen that those things were compromising to me, I understood that it's something I can't be a part of. So when it says that come out of her so that you don't participate in her sins, if you as a particular person are inside of a position where, because of your work life or because of your social life, because of the culture around you, you would, to continue to live in Babylon, you have to participate in the sins, then yes, you're being called out. You're being called physically out. But if you are someone who has been able to maintain your integrity, this might not be necessarily be a call to you, but it's always a call to you spiritually, meaning there's a spiritual call that all of us separate from the sins of these nations that we are living in. But many of us, I think, are going to have to literally come out of her, because of the nature of the societies that we're in, it becomes harder in order to follow Yahuwah. It becomes harder to keep the Shabbat, to keep the Sabbath, the seventh day holy. It becomes harder to not engage inside of the different sexual sins that are constantly being thrown on your TV screen. These things become harder. So this is a call to us. I think it's not just physical, but it's also spiritual. Come out of her. Leave these things behind. And I want to also read, because I want you to understand, Babylon has a curse on it itself. Revelations 18:2-3. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons, and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have fallen because of her wine, the wine of her passion, and of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich from the excessive wealth of her luxury. So come out of her. This is the curse that's on Babylon, and this curse will actually come to fruition at some time. So this is something to always keep in mind, that there is a curse on this land. If you're in the United States, the curse on that land. If you're in Europe, there's a curse on that land. So I'm not saying that this is something that necessarily you have to run out and leave. That's not necessarily the case for everyone. Absolutely let the Ruach HaKodesh lead you. But have an honest conversation to understand what your limitations are and what your ability is. Because if you are being called by the Ruach to come out in a physical sense, be adherent and follow through, because don't be caught inside of a fallen Babylon. All right, so everyone, that really wraps up this particular conversation. What is the curse of the law? The curses of Deuteronomy 28 are finally written out. That is the curse of the law. So whenever Paul says, Yahushua HaMashiach redeems you from the curse of the law, meaning if you believe in him, if you die to yourself and are resurrected by the Ruach HaKodesh, you can live not under these curses, despite the fact you were a descendant of bloodline Yasharel. If you are a Gentile, meaning if you're not a bloodline descendant of Yasharel, don't think that you're not under a curse, because all of us have ancestors who have entered into covenants. So, for example, if you're a descendant of Adam, and all of us are, Adam has a curse on him. So similarly, if you want to be redeemed from curses that are in your bloodline, again, follow Yahushua HaMashiach, abandon what is the physical life that you've been taught to cling to, abandon the material consumption, abandon Babylon, and instead die to yourself to be resurrected by the Spirit, the same Spirit that rose Yahushua HaMashiach from the dead. So you too, you might not have the Deuteronomy 28 curses, but you have curses that are also in your bloodline, especially many of us who are descended from people who actually did these oppressive things to Yasharel. Don't realize that there are also curses for the oppressors of Yasharel. So encouraging you all to get to know Yahushua HaMashiach by reading the Word. He is the Word. He was in the beginning, and Yahuwah spoke the Word. Read the Word, get to know Him. That's how you'll be able to know whether or not you're following Him correctly, because His words are not the words that we're being taught through the systems of Christianity, through the systems of this world. Instead, you can only know His word by picking up the scriptures and actually reading it for yourself. So thank you all for watching. God willing, I'll see you on the next video.